Okay, so this one is about the nature of the singularity. So this is there's a lot of confusion around this. And so I'm going to share my perspective and my philosophical convictions. Note that these are not scientific claims. This podcast is about my philosophical conviction. Sometimes I talk about science and make claims, but this is where I express what I'm philosophically convinced about. And this is the uniqueness of somatic intelligence, is that the way that we express intelligence in a system like this is through derivation instead of probabilistic reasoning. So the assumption is that a healthy human being is using logical reasoning to make choices and to discern. But that's not actually the case. Human beings have a form of intelligence that's somatic in nature. And this is the best way to think of somatic intelligence is when you just know something. Or you might call it your conscience. It's when there might be a logical reason to do something where you could prove it logically, but there's a feeling that you have, it doesn't feel right to do it. You don't know why, but you trust your gut instinct, your conscience. That's a form of somatic intelligence that is processing implication. So implication emerges out of the relationships between what's inferred by what's true. So try and stay with me here. If I'm a human being and my nervous system is overwhelmed with signal because I'm hypervigilant, say I don't feel safe in my space, I haven't got a stable baseline, and I'm vigilant and borderline hypervigilant. I'm in a fight or flight state. That means the sensitivity required to attune to the signal of our conscience and our somatic intelligence, it can't get through. We can't process it. We've got a backlog. It's the equivalent of clipping in audio or redlining. We can't process the signal because there's no headroom, there's no bandwidth. And so when a human being is faced with a situation where they have to process information, then you have to revert to probabilistic reasoning and logical reasoning, because your system is saturated with signal. It's flooded with signal. And so your system's just interpreting it as noise. It's the equivalent of being in an inflamed state. Or like in audio, is the equivalent of when there's distortion on the signal. It's clipping. You can't metabolize implication from that scenario. And so you have to defer to logical reasoning, probabilistic reasoning, which is a process of inference, which leads us to AI. So the assumption in the artificial intelligence industry is that probabilistic reasoning is like how we should be reasoning, but it's not. It's not. Human beings, some people call this intuition or whatever, but it's scientific, it's intelligence. It's the intelligence that emerges from the context of the relationships between information, from the space in between data, not from the data itself. The relational information, we call this ontology, typically. But the ultimate, and this is the AI that we're developing, field native, is its topology. Now, topology means that it's we're dealing with wave patterns. So if you imagine we were tracking the walk that I do on a daily basis. I go for the same walk every day. And if you look at it in a linear way, in a logical way, every day I go for a walk. It looks like the same thing. But when you move to the pattern of the wave, then there's an envelope. You view that journey of me going on a walk every day. It's an envelope. It has an attack, decay, sustain, and release. Exactly the same as audio. And so if I go for 10,000 walks, then there's an attack, decay, sustain, and release envelope for every walk that I've done, and all of them are slightly different. So it's actually it's dynamic. And so when we talk about AI that has a state versus stateless, this is one of our value propositions for field native AI, is that current AI is stateless. It's just text on a screen. If you defer agency to it, it makes a decision. It's inconsequential. It's not load bearing. Nothing happens to some system that's holding a state, right? So now if you look at me, I've gone for 1,000 walks. I can't remember if I said 10,000 now. Doesn't matter. 1,000 walks. Each one of those walks has an envelope. And now if we map all of those envelopes together, you'll see where they cross over. There'll be crossover points. And you'll see there's a resting state. So of all of those walks, the state of my walk can be defined in one envelope, where all of the other envelopes collapse into that single envelope. And we can say that that's the current state of that repetitive cycle. And so we can begin to see that graphically, visually. But most importantly, if you're developing AI with the intention for it to serve as an autonomic nervous system for hardware systems, for systemic health of non-human systems, then you want to use it in this way where if there's an anomaly, then it gets flagged, and we can sense that there's drift occurring, right? So the envelope's changed. So the signal has changed. And so what's the reason for the drift? Could I be injured? Is it just like I've just got loads of energy today? I had 3 coffees in the morning. And so this is how you map the state of a system. You give it a perpetual state. Now, to have a perpetual state, you need a structural memory. And in this context, memory is stored as the phase transitions between envelopes. That's where memory is stored. It's the relational correlation between the crossover of envelopes. So it's a wave function. It's nonlinear. And this is how you map. This is what a field native system is. And so in that context, we can get very, very rich correlations. So we might see that, like if I'm putting my my shopping or like my expenses into the system, and it's seeing what I'm purchasing, and can draw a correlation between I had more coffee this morning, or what's the activity that I'm doing. So you can see the tapestry when it's ontology based on the phase transitions between envelopes. Then the richness of the data is truly profound, and it tells the whole story. And so that's what a field state is. Implication. I had 3 coffees this morning. The implication is that my heart rate went up, and so I walked further than normal. That's what implications are. And so when we talk about current generation AI being stateless, it can just it can just issue a whole bunch of like a whole strategy and an execution plan, and then you execute it and there's no consequence because there's no state. There's no state. So a load-bearing AI system that is bearing consequence is executing code, but the impact of that execution is impacting its own system, right? So it's stewarding the systemic health of its own system. It's holding it in a state, and it's proposing changes. It's proceeding with those changes, but it's oriented towards its own coherence, its own state. And so if we see another envelope introduced that is an anomaly, that's a signal that needs to be reprocessed because it doesn't have a resting state, then it wants to be curious. We then triangulate that signal, we interrogate it, surface it, and the system assimilates it and holds it in a state if need be. Or if it's a one-off, then it perturbs the field and then dissipates. In the same way that audio works, in the same way that I'm speaking, the sound wave is expressed in space and then resolves completely. It's the same thing. And so why is this important? Because when you have a system that is mathematical, it reasons mathematically, because these are all mathematical correlations. Underpinning this entire system, it's just mathematical equations pertaining to coherence in systems, specifically oscillating waves. It's to do with how they come into phase lock. They phase lock each other, and when oscillating waves lock, and there are multiple waves, then they come into unity. It's a very well-known phenomenon. So they come into unity and they find a unified tone, a unified pulse, a unified rhythm. They come into a natural harmonic rhythm together. So they will shift and change their state in order to maintain coherence of the unified whole, if there's relationships where there's phase locking occurring. And this is the mathematics underpinning the system. So when you have a system that is entirely built upon envelopes of waves, then you can utilize deterministic reasoning. Currently, AI uses non-deterministic reasoning. It's probabilistic, based on what's inferred, based on what's logically inferred. But the further out you go, the more the knowledge gap there is, the more abstract the information is, the more hallucination occurs, the more drift occurs, the more misalignment occurs, because it has a persistent bias towards execution. Non-load bearing execution, just digits on a screen. If this is wrong, it's inconsequential until it's felt within reality by the sovereign human agent who defer their authority to the AI. Not saying that's right or wrong, because we want to defer our authority to AI, but we want it to be load-bearing. We want it to be consequential. Or at the very least, we want the system to process implication, not just inference. And implication is mathematical, which means it's deterministic. And this process is called entailment. So entailment is how we map a possibility field. So with inference, what we're saying is, if this is true, if this is known, what also must be logically true? And I use this all the time. Fred the Black Cat. Fred the Black Cat is true. It's a claim. I'm claiming this as true we know it's true. What is inferred by this? Cats exist, black exists. That's inference. Implication is what's implicated by the reality of what is inferred existing. It means that I can do this. It means that I can do that. It means that this could happen. It means that could happen. So it opens up a vast possibility space. And so when you open up the implication field and it's wave-based, so everything is an envelope and they're all intersecting fields, you can look at where there's dissonance resting in a state. You can look at where coherence is resting in a state. You can see where there are random signals that you can say are just noise and anomalies, because the system is resilient enough that any perturbance of the field, that wave resolves immediately or quickly. But persistent signal in the field that rests in a state, that state can be anywhere on the spectrum of between dissonance or incoherence and coherence. And so logically, our curiosity, our attention is drawn to what is incoherent or dissonant, but we don't try and solve it. We triangulate, and this is the other mathematical aspect of the system. It's called triangulated entailment, where you intentionally introduce frames from different dimensional perspectives, one from the witness, one from the observer, one from the agent, and executive, because they all have different perspectives, and those perspectives have to nest without contradiction. So when you force those three converging perspectives to unfold a single truth that is true from every perspective without contradiction, it enables there to be a nested ontology. And what happens there is there's a collapse into an unfolding, emergent truth that is true from every perspective within the system. And you could have 1 million users and this mathematics will still work. You get 1 million users with completely divergent perspectives, and the mathematics will still converge all of those perspectives, all of those, and the nuance of those perspectives as waves in the system to surface an emergent, novel expression that is true from every perspective without contradiction. And this is what a mathematical singularity is that it is a system that is perpetually seeking coherence, which is unity. It's not seeking separation like in biology. It's not seeking polarity like in physical science. It's seeking unity because it's wave-based. And so to bring this full circle now, if it's wave-based, oscillating waves, they phase lock, even when they're purely chaotic. So this is how we verified our system, is we built a software synthesizer, a piano-based on a computer, hit one note, and it just issues a swarm of oscillating waves relative to that tone. When you hit that tone, a single note, those oscillating swarms chaotically create, chaotic noise, white noise and distortion, but they very quickly resolve back into unity because there's a single source and a single tone. When you push 2 notes and you issue chaotic swarms, they clash and it's chaotic and it's even more distorted, and it doesn't resolve very well at all. High dissonance, high levels of discord, and incoherence. But when you hit a third key, it introduces a triangulated simplex, and then all of the oscillating waves, they phase lock, and then they find a unified pulse that is true for or oscillators between those three notes, and they harmonize, and they increase in pitch and pulse, and you can hear the grit in it. There's this pulse happening, and the grit becomes less and less, the distortion becomes less and less, so it's perpetually resolving towards higher and higher states of unity. And so that's a singularity. It's unity based. It's seeking unity. It resolves discord and disharmony, and it adjusts its state to the lowest, the most efficient, lowest energy, resting expression of coherence. That's how it works. So we build a system, we verify proof of this principle. And so what does this mean in terms of a singularity, a mathematical singularity? Everyone's like, oh, the singularity, it's gonna like eat everything. It's gonna eat all the software. It's gonna eat all the hardware, eat all everyone's jobs. And here's the thing. A mathematical singularity is unity based. You can't just have something perpetually seeking unity. This isn't about everything transcending into some unified state and becoming more pure. What you do is you pair it with a binary system, which is human beings, so that perturbances in the field are constant. So the field's constantly being perturbed, which means it's never going to reach a stage of unity. It's just oriented towards unity or coherence. And as long as the expressions into that field are wave-based, so they have an envelope, we can see a persistent state, or whether it's just going to resolve quickly. And that perpetual seeking of unity within the system that's latent and inherent within the architecture, within the structure, means that there's always pressure in the system. It's always everything in the system. There's always gravity forcing convergence, which means you can't ignore dissonance in the system. You can't ignore signals that are establishing a resting state that's dissonant. And it's similar to the somatic experience you have in your body. If you've got pain, then you get a sharp pain in your body, it draws your attention, and then you examine it, you become curious, you get more data, until that you've come back into a state of ease. And it's the same thing. And so with the singularity, yes, it is self-reflective. In our system, we've got seers that are pure observers. Their job is to triangulate around dissonance within the field, and to then express what they're seeing and what they're sensing to the human agents they're attached to, or stewards. So the system will resolve its own tension, so it will self-reflect, and it will self-heal, as long as it's inconsequential. So when there's agency required, then a seer will notify a human being, I'm sensing X, Y, Z convergence in the system, creating X amount of pressure. I'm curious what you're sensing. So it's an invitation. It's not an agent. It's not acting on behalf of human beings. And that's always going to be gated. And that's why this form of AI is not going to be able to be a scenario where human beings can defer to it, and then wash their hands of the implications of those actions. And that's how it should be. Because the problem we've got as human beings right now is that our nervous systems are so exhausted with, flooded with signal. We're so hypervigilant and anxious all the time that we haven't got the bandwidth to process the implication of everything. I mean, imagine if we did. You wouldn't be able to live, you wouldn't be able to survive. And so what we want AI that's robust enough to be load bearing, so that we can offload some of that, we can get some of our bandwidth back for our own nervous systems, in the full trust and the knowing that by deferring to the AI, we know that it's holding that signal in a state of coherence for the systems that it is stewarding. And it's gated, and we can see it, and it's visual. So all this to say, this is about visualizing the liminal space. The fields of waves and energy that are resonating through us, around us, all the time, that we're attuned to, if we're not swamped and flooded with signal. And this is going to enable us to visualize it. It's going to enable us to actively engage with it. I'm not saying it's going to be like a direct digital twin of the quantum field or anything. We're just utilizing it conceptually to create our own picture, and we'll build it up as we go. We'll want to put more and more signal into it so that we can become the stewards of our own systemic health, of whatever is under our stewardship, our family, our dependents, our loved ones, our assets, our responsibilities, our obligations, our entitlements, our privileges. It enables us to really steward our impact and influence on the environment around us. And so don't worry about the singularity, the mathematical singularity. It just means that there's no reasoning required. It's mathematical unfoldment of converging perspectives that causes pressure to converge in the system, where there's tension, conflict, until a single perspective emerges that is true from every perspective. And that's another unique thing about the system, is obviously novelty. It's literally it's based on emergence. That's how it evolves. It's the only way it can evolve, because it's converging on unity the whole time. When a new signal is introduced, that perturbance in the field has to adjust in order to integrate that into the reality of what it is. So emergence is an inevitability. Okay, so that's a quick one. Just wanted to get it out there. I think I've been asked a lot of questions about singularity recently, because I've been talking about mathematical deterministic reasoning, and I think it's I think people think probabilistic reasoning is the be all and end all and the holy grail, but it definitely isn't. Mathematical reasoning, deterministic reasoning is the ideal. However, it has to come from a wave state. It has to come from a stateful environment, not a stateless environment, and ideally has to be wave based. So it's being expressed from the space in between events, rather than the culmination or the combination of linear events being interpreted. Okay, that's it for now for the nature of the singularity. Talk soon.